What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld. Thank you for joining me. This is episode 28 of Hockey on the Spot, continuing with the 30 teams in 30 days for the entire month of August. And for today, we are going to talk about the New York Islanders going into the Long Island area, the suburbs. So, as we'll be in New York for the next 2 days, starting with the New York Islanders. New York Islanders, they really surprised everybody last season. They absolutely did. Going into the lockout shortened season with a team not too familiar by many fans, especially the players, um, did get off to kind of a rough start. Looked like their old selves. Elves. Um, but late toward the end of the year, they really picked it up. They absolutely did, and finished the year as one of the best road teams in the National Hockey League. The fifth best road team in the National Hockey League, behind the Chicago Blackhawks, Pittsburgh Penguins, Anaheim Ducks, and Montreal Canadiens. So, a very good season for the Islanders, especially on the road. Toward the end of the season, they were virtually unbeaten on the road, or seemingly unbeaten. And they had a good team last year. They had a good young team. The defense was a little on the inconsistent side, and the goaltending, of course, is in question. But the Islanders ultimately would make it to the playoffs for the first time since 2007, and it was a really, really good season to reflect upon for a lot of Islanders fans. Now, yeah, they finished in the eighth seed in the Eastern Conference, and yeah, they didn't go very far. They lost in the first round in 6 games by the hands of the Pittsburgh Penguins. However, at points in the series, they really did stick with the Penguins, and considering the team that they had gotten after the trade deadline, that all-star caliber team, for a team like the New York Islanders to take them to 6 games and stick with them at a lot of points, that's really impressive. The Islanders really played impressive in that series, and they really stuck with them during the games in which Marc-Andre Fleury was the starting goaltender. It really then became out of reach when Thomas Vokoun became the starter. That's when things came out of reach for the New York Islanders. And so, a disappointing exit, but a great season to look upon and to improve on. A season that can really inspire the team for this full 82 game schedule of the 2013-2014 season. And as far as the overall league standings go, I mentioned they finished 8th in the East, a record of 24, 17, and 7 for a combined 55 points in the league. That's 16th. They were the last place team among all playoff teams, but also locked in a 3-way tie with the Minnesota Wild and the Columbus Blue Jackets. The Minnesota Wild were on top, the Blue Jackets were on the bottom, and the Islanders were in the middle. The Wild would also make the playoffs as the 8th seed for the West, and the Columbus Blue Jackets would not last year. They were in the West last year, now in the East. And so, for the first time since 2008, the Islanders were able to get by without a top 5 pick. However, they would be given the number 15 pick. However, they picked a really good player, defenseman Ryan Pulock, who may just have the hardest shot from that draft, a 100-mile-per-hour slap shot, and could be a big part of the future of their blue line. And speaking of which, this team is about to get much younger for this upcoming year. A lot of pieces leaving this season, which could mean a little bit of a setback year for the Islanders. They have a lot of pieces that left this past year, despite the fact that they made the playoffs last year. A lot of improvements are definitely needed. They have a lot of guys who have already left and have signed with other teams. Jesse Joensuu, a depth player and a former fan favorite, he signs with the Edmonton Oilers. And 34-year-old Keith Aucoin, another depth player, he signs with the St. Louis Blues. And then the two bigger losses for the New York Islanders this year, Nino Niederreiter, the 5th overall pick in the 2010 NHL entry draft, never lived up to his expectations on Long Island. And so the Islanders, feeling that many other players have a better shot than him. Traded him to the Minnesota Wild. Trade we'll look more into in a bit here. But the biggest loss for the New York Islanders this season, veteran defenseman Mark Streit, who had been their captain for the past 2 years, led all Islander defensemen last year with 27 points, was a huge part of their defense last year. And unfortunately, they failed to come to terms as far as a contract goes with him, and therefore they had no choice but to trade him and his contract rights. They traded him to the Philadelphia Flyers and didn't get much back in return. But ultimately, he was signed to a contract by the Philadelphia Flyers, so he'll miss his big shot from the point. He was a power play quarterback for this team, and they're going to miss him very much. They'll miss his leadership, and which is why one of the questions, which is not going to be that hard to answer, is who's going to be the captain for the New York Islanders. That's not going to be hard to answer. John Tavares will become the captain of the New York Islanders for this upcoming season. And those are guys that they lost that have gone to other teams. However, they also have a bunch of guys still without teams that are not with the team anymore. A couple of Bridgeport Sound Tigers, Blair Riley, Nathan McKeever, and Sean Backman, they are gone. Radek Martinek, who did not play a lot, only played 13 games last year and 2 playoff games. He's gone after a short second stint with the Islanders. Marty Reisner is gone. He had been their fourth line center for the past couple of years. But then the 2 bigger losses for the New York Islanders, Brad Boyes, who played last season on the top line with John Tavares and Matt Moulson, and actually had a good year. He only had 10 goals. However, he had 35 points, 25 assists, and that's a lot for a 48-game season. He played really well. It was somewhat of a comeback year for him. Big reason why they made the playoffs. He is gone. The Islanders will not sign him back, and that is going to prove to be a pretty big loss for them. And then the other interesting one, who is still on the unrestricted free agent board, goaltender Tim Thomas. Now, Tim Thomas last year was traded to the New York Islanders by the Boston Bruins midway through the year in exchange for a 7th-round draft pick. However, he did not play a game last year. He opted to take the year off. Was absolutely committed to it, and now he's an unrestricted free agent. He is still looking for a home. It will not be with the New York Islanders, considering that they have re-signed a bunch of players long-term. They re-signed Josh Bailey to a 5-year deal, and they also re-signed Travis Hamonic to a 7-year deal. So those guys are in long-term, and also they signed goaltender Evgeny Nabokov to another 1-year contract, so he will be their starter for the upcoming year. Kevin Poulin will most likely be their backup. And then midway through last season, the Islanders also made another contract extension to veteran defenseman Lubomir Vishnowsky. They signed him to a 2-year contract extension. And now they're going to need him more than ever with Mark Streit gone. Did not start the season last year. Spent the beginning of the year over in his hometown of Slovakia. But now he will be with them full time, and they're going to need him to step up this year with Mark Streit gone. An equally as good shot from the point, a guy who could also be a power play quarterback. They're going to need him to step up this year. And with all these re-signings and departures, the Islanders were also able to make a few additions this offseason. Not a whole lot, but just a few. Including center Peter Regan, who's coming over from the Ottawa Senators. They add him for depth. Former highly touted player, native out of Denmark, former 3rd-round pick, and a former good player for the Ottawa Senators. Has had injury problems in the past couple of years, so expect that he will not see a big role with the New York Islanders this coming year. He may just be in as a 13th forward. But then the other 2 additions they made will be regulars in the lineup. Both players that they added here, both coming over from the Minnesota Wild. They had a lot to do with the Minnesota Wild this offseason. One of them being center/right winger Pierre-Marc Bouchard. Pierre-Marc Bouchard, a former 8th overall draft pick back in 2002. He's now 29 years of age. Has not lived up to his draft status since being drafted. His best season was in 07-08 when he had 63 points, 50 assists. So that was his best year, and it's really a shame. This is a guy who's had injury problems throughout his entire career, which is why his draft status has not been able to be lived up. A guy with excellent hands, a great playmaker, and has the tendency to make highlight reel passes and sometimes scores highlight reel goals. That's what he was known for in the minors. And when he's healthy, he does that quite a bit in the NHL, but not a lot. Again, injuries have really hindered his career. However, they only signed him to a one-year deal. This is going to basically be a year for him to basically try to pick himself off the ground, and he'll get a big opportunity to do that this year, taking Brad Boyes' place on the top line with John Tavares at center and Matt Moulson on the left wing side. He'll play on the right wing. So big opportunity for Pierre-Marc Bouchard to get himself back in the shape. And then the big off-season acquisition for the Islanders this year, the player who they got when they traded Nino Niederreiter to the Minnesota Wild, Cal Clutterbuck. Cal Clutterbuck is a guy who's been known for as one of the biggest hitters in the National Hockey League. He was among the league leaders last year with 155, and also a guy who could put up decent offense. However, last year, his offensive numbers were down. He did not have a good year offensively last year, only 10 points. However, this year, he could look to pick those numbers up now with a change of scenery. He'll be a depth player for the New York Islanders, one of their bigger depth players. He'll probably play on the third line, possibly with Michael Grabner on there as well, and either Franz Nielsen or Ryan Strome, possibly. They definitely will have a lot of options for that third line. Cal Clutterbuck will definitely be there. And this is a good addition. The Islanders did need to bulk themselves up a little bit. And Clutterbuck, one of the hard-working power forwards, who's smaller but gets it done through his ability to hit. And it's players like him and like Ryan Callahan and Dustin Brown and Ryan Clough and Brad Marchand and Zach Parise that really set the tone for the future of power forwards. Smaller guys, but with a grinding style and can change games with their grind. This is a guy who can change the pace of a game just with one hit. He scored goals just by hitting people, and so the Islanders will be really happy to have him. These additions, though, may not have been possible if not for the buyout of the contract of former first overall draft pick from 2000, Rick DiPietro. Rick DiPietro has been a humongous disappointment since being drafted. The Islanders had signed him originally signing him to that historic 15-year, $67.5 million contract. He became one of the most overpaid players in the National Hockey League, if not the most overpaid player in the National Hockey League, and he never lived up to that contract. Injuries have been a huge problem for him, and last year he only played 3 games, did not win a single game, gave up at least 3 goals in each game. So for him, his New York Islander days are over. Very upsetting for him, but it had to be done. The Islanders would use one of their 2 compliance buyouts to buy out the remaining years of his contract. But it doesn't come without a price. Rick DiPietro will be getting $1.5 million from the New York Islanders over the next 16 years. So it's not all in vain. But now the problem for DiPietro is finding another team. He has yet to find another team, and honestly, I would have my doubts that he will find another team. But because of buying him out, they were able to extend Josh Bailey. They were able to extend Travis Hamonic and give both of them long-term deals that they maybe did deserve. For Josh Bailey, it was 5 years, $16.5 million, and for Travis Hamonic, 7 years, $27 million. So Oh, good move by the New York Islanders to finally buy out Rick DiPietro, a guy who had been a favorite among the other players. Now, with a lot of questions revolving around the New York Islanders this season, with Mark Streit gone, who plays on defense? Who gets called up on defense? They got Andrew McDonald back there. Now, of course, Travis Hamonic and Lubomir Visnovsky, Brian Streit. They also got but they also got Matt Carkner as well, but he could settle as being the seventh defenseman. I look at youngsters like Thomas Hickey and maybe a guy like Matt Donovan who could definitely play. Thomas this year. Hickey made his NHL debut last year and played most of the games. They also got Calvin DeHaan down there. He can definitely play. Scott Mayfield is a possibility. Aaron Ness is another possibility. They have a lot of options, but honestly, I have a feeling Matt Donovan will most likely be the guy that they will go with. And that's really where their problems lie, is on defense. Their defense is really inconsistent. Throughout the years since 2010, 2011, scoring has not been the problem for the New York Islanders. They had the scoring abilities to be a playoff team all these years. They have the scoring ability. They have the potential up front. They're good as far as their offense. Defense and goaltending has been the problem for them. So those are the areas they're going to need to look to remedy for the rest of this offseason and in training camp. All right, now let's take a look at the top 10 prospects for the New York Islanders. I like this prospect pool a lot. I think it's a very deep prospect pool. I don't think it's that as deep as the New Jersey Devils or the Columbus Blue Jackets, but it is much, much deeper than that of the Carolina Hurricanes, for sure. They got Ryan Strome as their number one prospect. He may just be the best prospect of all the teams that we have done so far in the Metropolitan Division. He's a guy who could step up into the NHL this year. Griffin Reinhart, who's actually another option on defense. He's their number two. Brock Nelson, who could step in this year up front, number three. Matt Donovan, Ryan Pulock, Matt Donovan. They have a lot of guys on. Anders Lee with a little bit of experience. Anders Nilsson. They have some guys on here with a lot of experience. They have a good prospect pool. However, the prospect on this list that really catches my eye is their number 4 prospect, defenseman Ryan Pulock. I talked about him earlier, the 15th overall pick in this year's past draft. And when I heard that he had a slap shot that goes about 100 miles per hour, I could not stay away from this kid. I could not look past him. This is a kid who had 14 goals and 45 points in 61 games for the Brandon Wheat Kings last season. And this is a guy who definitely has the potential to be a prototypical power play quarterback in the coming years. I think this kid has a bright future for the Islanders. Now, the player on this team that has to step up his game this year in order for the Islanders to be successful this year, I was going to say Evgeny Nabokov, because a lot of the season will rely on him to have as good of a year during the regular season as he did last year and not look like he did in the playoffs. However, the player I'm going to say is defenseman Lubomir Visnovsky. He's not getting any younger, but now with Mark Streit gone, they'll basically expect him to pick up where he left off from that 2010-2011 season with the Anaheim Ducks. If the Islanders are going to be good on defense, he has to get back to playing the way we know he can as a power play quarterback and an offensive defenseman. Overall, are the Islanders a playoff team this year? Honestly, I think considering the new division alignment and some of the teams ahead of them, I think they're going to have some setbacks this year. I do think they'll be in that bubble mix. I like their offense. I love their offense. They have the offensive potential, but defense, that's very inconsistent, and in goal, very inconsistent as well. You can never tell with an older Evgeny Nabokov. So I think they'll be a bubble team, but in the end, I think they're going to have a setback year. I don't think they're ready to handle a full 82-game schedule. 48 games is one thing, 82 games is a different thing. So for the New York Islanders, I'm going to say no, they're not a playoff team. All right, guys, that'll do for episode 28 of Hockey on the Spot. Join me again tomorrow when we go to the heart of New York City to talk about the New York Rangers. So until then, this has been Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld. Join me again tomorrow. Thank you very much, and have a great day.